So now that we've seen how we can write a method, let's actually write it in IntelliJ and run it and see how it works. So first we would write the method for calculating the area of a circle. And if you remember, the area of a circle will have a uh, return type. A return type would be double. So we write that first, and then we write the name of the method, which is calculate circle area. And yeah, this is where we'll have our collection of statements. This is where we'll have our specific tasks that we want to do, right? But we also want to have an input. The input would be of integer type, and the input would be radius, right? So now you see this is actually giving me an error saying that there's a missing return statement, which means that Java is thinking, hey, you said you'll return a double. There is nothing that you've written that returns anything, or it does not return a double. So unless we write the return statement, this error would persist. First, we define a variable named area, which is of double type, and then we store the value of our calculation in the variable area. And the value of our calculation would be multiplying pi with radius and again with radius, right? And this radius is basically what we're getting from the input. So now we have calculated the area. We'll talk about why I wrote math.py a little bit, but before that, let's write the return statement. And we are returning the area variable. So now you see the error is gone, and now the method knows that a double value is being returned. We also have to define what this method's access modifier is, and that is static. What is an access modifier? What is static? We'll learn about that in later videos, so don't worry about it right now. Just keep in mind that the actual method is basically this part. All right, so let's now call our method. Our method's name is calculate circle area, and the result that we get from it is a double type, right? So we want to store it in a double variable. So we define some double variable x, and there we actually calculate the area of a circle which has, let's say, radius 9. So if we try to calculate the area of a circle with radius 9, this method would be called. Some result would come out, and that result would then be stored in x. And then we can do whatever we want with x. We can use this x in other calculations that we might want to do in our program. But for now, because we want to see what the result of that is, instead of putting it in x, let's just print it out. And this is what we do when we want to print it out. So we just put this whole statement, the signature of the method with the variable in it, or with the value of the radius variable in it, inside the system.out.println statement. So let's run this and see how this works, or whether or not it actually gives us the right result. So you see, it actually gave us this result, and if you put pi into 9 in your calculator, you'll find this to be the result. Of course, if we change this to, let's say, 5, the result would be different. This is 254. If the radius is 5, the result would be 78, right? So you see, now whenever you want to calculate the area of any circle, all you need to do is write this part and put the radius in. And that will call this method and calculate the area of the circle and give you the result back. And this is the utility of methods, that whenever you're trying to do something again and again, it actually saves you from writing a lot of code. You write the code just once, and after that, you just call the method and it gives you the result. Every time you don't have to multiply pi with the radius squared. Now, why did I write math.py? Because pi is a constant, right? And the value of this constant is 3.142, and then you can go as long as you want in the number of decimal places. but that's the first few significant digits. That constant is already defined in Java, and that constant belongs to the math class. So the math part here is basically a class, and pi here is basically a constant in the math class. So if you press Control on your keyboard and hover over this or any other word or any other symbol, this will actually turn blue, and you can click on it, and then it'll take you to the definition of that class. So this is the class, and we'll see how classes are written. But if this is the class, and here you see this is already defined as a constant, and its value is 3.1415. And when we call math.py, that value is called, and we can use that value directly. So I know that's a lot in terms of understanding, because we don't necessarily fully understand classes yet, but we will in the next few videos, and you'll understand exactly what was going on here. So now that we've seen an example of how methods are written, let's talk about methods in a more general way. Methods can be about anything. Methods can be written for any task that you want to automate, right? So here you don't want to calculate the area of a circle again and again. So you just created a method that allows you to write a simple statement, and you'll find the result of what you're looking for. But let's try and create some other method. We can think of any task, right? So let's say that task is to get the sum of all the elements in an array. You remember that arrays are data structures that can store many different elements at the same time. If you just say an integer type of variable is storing some value, then that integer type of variable, or that double type of variable, or that string type of variable can only store one value at a time. But arrays, as you remember, can store many values at the same time. So let's say we want to define our array, and it can store, let's say, just integer types of elements. So this is how we define it, that it will store integer types of elements. And let's say we give it a name named myArray. And then we say that inside this array, there are a few different elements. So they could be 12, 34, 56, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 3, whatever, right? So you have all these different elements in there. So let's say we want to create a method where whenever we have an array, any array, we would be able to get the sum of all of those elements. And we want to create that kind of a method. So let's create that method, and let's actually think about it first. So what will be the input? The input would be the array itself, right? And what would be the output? The output would be an integer, because we are thinking of integer arrays. The output would be an integer. This will be the sum of all the different elements, right? So now we know what the input is. Now also we know what the output is. So now let's try and create the method. Now we know the output type. The output type is going to be integer, right? So we write down integer. We then try and give it a name. What's a good name for this? Maybe some array elements. And in this method, we will have an input. The input would be an array of integer type, right? So let's just say we call it array, and it will be of integer type. Now, inside, what can we do? We can either add up the different elements of the array individually, but we don't want to do that, right? We want to work smarter than that. So we can write a for loop. A for loop will go through each and every element and then add it to a variable. And then at the end, the variable's value would be equal to the sum of all the different elements in the array. So let's say the variable that we define is called sum, and it will be of integer type, right? And at first, let's say the value of the variable is 0. So there's nothing in sum. Now, we can create a for loop and we can iterate through the array, and we can say int I equals 0. There would be an iterator that will start from 0. The iterator would keep on going until it reaches the length of the array, and we will increase the value of the iterator by 1 on each iteration. Great. Now inside we might want to sum up all the different elements. Now the sum is 0. Now I want to add the first element to the sum. So I will say whatever the value of sum is, add it to the first element of the array. And the first element of the array is array I right now, right? Because the value of I is 0 in this iteration. The next time the value of I would be 1. The next time the value of I would be 2, and so on. It'll keep on going. But the value of sum currently is 0, and the value of array is 0, and also the value of I is 0. So the value of array 0 would be 12, because this is the 0th index, right? This is the 0th index, the first index, the second index, the third index, and so on. So array 0 is actually 12. So since the value of sum is 0 now, this value would turn out to be 0 plus 12 equals 12. So sum will have the value 12 stored in it. Now the next time this iterator goes back up here, the value of I changes. The value of I goes from 0 to 1. And when the value of I goes from 0 to 1, it checks whether or not 1 is less than the length of the array. What is the length of the array that we are inputting here? So let's say we are inputting my array, right? So in that case, the length of the array would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the value of the length of the array is 9. Right now, I was 0. We had this. Then the iterator went back. I became 1 because the value of I increased by 1. And then it checks whether or not 1 is less than 9. That is true. So it goes back in here again. Now the value of sum right now is 12. So 12 is the value that is stored in sum, right? So that value is taken here, 12, plus array 1 now. And array 1 is 34. So then 12 plus 34 gives you 46. And then 46 gets stored in sum. And then this process keeps on going until all the different values are added to the value of sum. So in the end, because when this for loop ends, the value of sum is basically the value of the addition of all the elements in the array, we just return the value sum. And you see this error is gone now. Right before this statement, this error was still there, right? But when we write this statement, the error goes away because now the method knows that an integer was supposed to be returned and it has been returned. Of course, we have to also write static here, and we'll again explain what this is in some later video. But right now, this actually gives us the value of the sum of all the different elements in an array. So now let's call this method and see whether or not this works. We don't necessarily want to store it in some variable. Let's just print it out, just like we did with the previous example. So we say system.out.println, and in there we say sum the array elements. And what array do we want to pass to it? We want to pass the array that we defined before, right? My array. So we'll just say my array. And so what would happen here is that the program would start. The program would start, it would come here, and it would see that an array has been defined, which is of integer data type. And then it'll come here, it'll see that something needs to be printed. What needs to be printed? This is something that needs to be printed. And then it searches for this method. It comes here. It also knows that you've actually input an array there. And so that array then gets transferred here. And then this whole task happens. The sum is calculated and the sum is then returned. So when the sum is returned, it gets returned here. And then it is printed out. So let's print it and see whether or not we actually get the correct result. You see, the value is 130. I'm sure if you put this in a calculator and add all of this up, it'll come out to be 130. So again, now if we want to have another different variable, which is, let's say, new array or some other array, right? It doesn't matter what we name it. And then it's another array of integer type. And let's say it only has 3 values, right? And or maybe it can have as many values as we want it to be. But just for this example's sake, let's say it has 3 values. Again, if we want to find the sum of these 3 values, instead of going through all of this, instead of writing all of this again, we can just call the method that we wrote, right? We can just say, hey, sum this array for me. And it would say, what array are you talking about? We'll say, well, sum this array. And then ask it to print this out. So let's delete this for now and see whether or not this actually gives us the right result. And if we run it, it should give us 9, right? And there you go. It actually gives us 9. So you see, instead of having to write all of this again for this new array, you only had to call this method. And this method then did the work for you. And again, this is the utility of methods, that you can reuse code as much as you want. One last thing I'll mention here is that what Java does when you run the program. So always remember that no matter what program you write, you will always have a main class. And inside this main class, you'll have a main method. Whenever you run a program, the main method inside the main class is run. So only stuff here is run, all right? Nothing else is run. And because you called some array elements, this also ran. You remember when we said methods will only be executed, the statements inside a method would only be executed if the method is called. So the method has been called here, which is why this got executed and you got this result. This method was not called here right now. We deleted that, right? This method was not called here. So you did not find any result from this part of your code. So you see, even though you wrote this code, there were no results from this code. You had no output from this code because you did not call this method. Only the methods that are called get executed. So keep that in mind. And the first thing that we talked about is that whenever you run a Java program, the main method inside the main class is run. And that is where the driver code is. That means that is where all the main instructions are given. All right. So keep that in mind. And lastly, also keep something else in mind, which is that methods can only reside inside a class. So again, we'll learn what a class is right in the next video, but always remember that methods cannot exist outside of a class. Here, this is the main class, and the main class starts here. And you see when I highlight this, this gets highlighted, means that the class starts here and ends here. Now these methods were defined inside the class, right? These methods were defined inside this class, and main is also another method. This is the main method, and this is another method that is inside the class. You see, this is the return type of the method. Again, public and static, we'll learn about this later, but think about this. Void is the return type, main is the name of the method, and it is taking some input. Now, what these inputs are, we'll understand later, but right now, all you need to understand is this part is also a method, and this is the main method. And this is the method that is run every time you run a program. So this is the entry point of any program. So now that you have some understanding of what methods are like and how they can be used and how they can be written, we can actually go and talk about classes. So see you in the next video.